From high above, the city was a jewel set between two seas. This was Constantinople. It rested on a triangular peninsula, a natural fortress guarding the passage between Europe and Asia. Below, the deep blue waters of the Sea of Marmara met the Bosphorus Strait. The city's great harbor, the Golden Horn, curved inland like a protective arm, filled with the masts of trading ships, Venetian ships, Genoese ships from the distant east. Dominating everything was the immense dome of Hagia Sophia. It seemed to float above the city, a marvel of engineering and a symbol of divine grace. Its golden mosaics glittered in the sun, a beacon for sailors and pilgrims alike. Nearby stood the Hippodrome, the ancient chariot racing stadium, now a vast public square haunted by the ghosts of emperors and roaring crowds. Imperial palaces with sprawling courtyards and intricate gardens lined the waterfront, their marble columns reflecting the light. Aqueducts, like stony serpents, snaked their way into the city, bringing fresh water from the hills beyond, a lifeline that had sustained its people for centuries. The entire city was wrapped in a formidable embrace of stone. The Theodosian walls, a triple line of defense, stretched for miles along the landward side. These were not mere walls. They were a statement of permanence, a declaration that Constantinople was eternal. From the air, they looked like the spine of some great beast, protecting the soft flesh of the city within. Towers stood at regular intervals, sentinels watching over the plains. The sea walls, though less massive, completed the circuit of protection, making the city a near impenetrable fortress. For a millennium, these defenses had turned back armies and frustrated would-be conquerors. But the city was more than stone and water. It was a living, breathing organism. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, a sign of the life teeming in the narrow streets below. The sounds of the city drifted up, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the call of a street vendor, the distant chant of monks from one of the hundreds of churches and monasteries. This was the Queen of Cities, the Second Rome. It had weathered storms, plagues, and sieges. It had seen empires rise and fall around it. Now, in the spring of 1453, it faced its greatest test. A new power was gathering outside its legendary walls, and the world was about to change forever. The Theodosian walls were the city's pride and its ultimate shield. They were a masterpiece of military architecture, built 1,000 years earlier and improved upon by generations of emperors. They consisted of 3 parallel barriers, a complex system designed to exhaust any attacker. Outermost, a wide, deep moat that could be flooded to bog down siege engines and infantry. Beyond the moat, a low crenellated wall, the first line for archers. Behind that, the outer wall, taller and stronger with 96 towers. The outer wall provided a second platform to rain down arrows, stones, and fire. The true heart, the inner wall, nearly 40 feet high and 16 feet thick. Its towers, almost 200, rose over 60 feet, offering a commanding view. Towers staggered between outer towers, creating an interlocking field of fire. Any army that breached the first 2 barriers would be trapped in the terrace, exposed to attack from above and all sides. For centuries, this design seemed invincible. It had repelled Avars, Arabs, Bulgars, Rus. The walls were more than defense. They were Byzantine resilience. Along the ramparts, soldiers kept vigil. Guardians, professional Byzantine troops, Genoese mercenaries, citizen militia. They walked stone walkways, leather boots echoing, breastplates of iron and leather, helmets gleaming. They carried spears, longbows, crossbows. From their vantage, fields, villages stretching to the horizon. They checked supplies of stones, barrels of Greek fire. They watched the Sea of Marmara, fishing boats, trade galleys, a sign of normalcy. But the walls held a hidden vulnerability, built in an older age, before gunpowder, designed for catapults, trebuchets, siege towers, battering rams. not designed for cannon. Stone and mortar that defied 1,000 years now faced a technology that could pulverize them. The wall's strength had bred a belief in permanence. That reliance bred dangerous complacency. Within the protection of the Great Walls, Constantinople pulsed with a life that was both grand and ordinary. The Mace, the city's main thoroughfare, was its central artery. It ran from the Golden Gate in the west to the Augustaion Square near the Great Palace. The street was paved with smooth stone slabs, wide enough for carts and processions. It was lined with colonnades, providing shade from the summer sun and shelter from the winter rain. Beneath these covered walkways were shops selling goods from every corner of the known world. Merchants displayed fine silks from China, fragrant spices from India, and rich furs from the northern lands of the Rus. The air was thick with the scent of cinnamon, cloves, and roasting chestnuts. In the smaller winding streets that branched off the Mace, the city's craftsmen were at work. Blacksmiths hammered, potters shaped, weavers sat at their looms. In quiet scriptoriums, scholars and scribes bent over desks, their hands stained with ink. They meticulously copied ancient manuscripts, preserving the knowledge of Greece and Rome. They debated philosophy and theology. This was a city of commerce, but it was also a city of the mind, a vast library of human thought. Family life unfolded. Children played. Women carried water. On Sundays and feast days, the city's people filled its hundreds of churches. They lit candles before icons. Religious processions snaked through the streets, led by priests in ornate vestments carrying banners and crosses. The sound of bells and chanting was a constant presence, a reminder of the deep faith that underpinned Byzantine society. Life was a blend of the sacred and the profane, the imperial and the domestic. Yet, even in the midst of this vibrant daily life, there were signs of decline. The population had dwindled from its peak of 500,000 to perhaps less than a tenth of that number. Many of the grand palaces and public buildings stood empty, their gardens overgrown, their mosaics falling into disrepair. The empire's territory had shrunk. The wealth that had once poured into the imperial treasury was now a fraction of its former glory. The city was like a magnificent old tapestry, still beautiful but frayed at the edges. It was a living museum. But its present was fragile and its future uncertain. The people of Constantinople lived in the shadow of their own history. They called themselves Romans. They did not call themselves Byzantines. They were the direct heirs of Augustus. They were the direct heirs of Constantine the Great. Their city was the new Rome. Their emperor was the rightful ruler of the world, God's chosen representative on earth. This identity was a source of immense pride and a heavy burden. They saw their present as a pale reflection, the hippodrome, once thrilling chariot races and imperial triumphs, now mostly used for ceremonies and public gatherings, ruins of forums and palaces, a silent rebuke to the present. This deep sense of history bred a belief: do things as they've always been done. The state bureaucracy had become a labyrinth of tradition and protocol. The military, once innovative with Greek fire, but still relying on centuries-old tactics, cultural and institutional rigidity, a resistance to change. They looked inward and backward, celebrating heritage. But outside, the world was changing. New ideas, new politics, new technologies. Adherence to tradition was turning into self-destruction. Leaders, including Constantine V, were brave and dedicated. They understood the dangers. They repaired the walls. They gathered supplies. They sought aid from the West. But they were trapped by circumstances and tradition's weight. Appeal to the Pope, the price, union of Orthodox and Catholic churches. Fierce resistance followed. Better the Sultan's turban than the Cardinal's hat. A common cry. The city was divided, unable to agree on survival. This division left them unprepared for the scale of the threat. They'd survived sieges before. They trusted their walls. They trusted their faith. They trusted their destiny as the eternal city. But their enemy did not respect traditions and wielded revolutionary technology. Failure to break patterns, to unify, and to grasp the new danger was critical. What had made Constantinople strong for a millennium was now making it brittle. Across the Bosphorus, a new and formidable power had consolidated its hold on the region. The Ottoman Empire, a Turkish state forged in the crucible of the Anatolian frontier, was young, hungry, ambitious. It was led by Sultan Mehmed II. He was only 21, but he had a strategic mind and an iron will. From his first day on the throne, he was consumed by one obsession: the conquest of Constantinople. The city was a thorn in his empire's side, a Christian island in a sea of Ottoman territory. He believed its capture would make his name immortal. Mehmed did not rush. He planned meticulously. His siege preparations were models of logistical and strategic foresight. He built a massive fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, a few miles north of the city. He named it Rumeli Hisari, the fortress of Roman land. It was raised in months. It was meant to control all ship traffic on the strait, to cut off Constantinople from aid from the Black Sea. A direct challenge to the Byzantines, a clear signal of intent. The fortress stood like a stone fist, closing around the city's lifeline. The Sultan then gathered a vast army, over 80,000 men. The city's defenders, perhaps 7,000. The camp before the Theodosian walls was a city of tents. Banners snapped, elite janissaries drilled, Bashi bazooks sharpened swords, engineers and miners readied tools. The camp was a hive of disciplined activity, all focused on one goal. Mehmed's forces were also technologically advanced. He assembled a fleet of over 100 ships to blockade the city. His decisive weapon, however, was artillery. The Ottomans embraced gunpowder eagerly. The defenders had only a few small cannons. Mehmed commissioned a siege train unlike any seen before. This was a clear and present danger the city's leadership underestimated. They saw the camps and ships, but they failed to grasp the scale of the revolution coming. Lesson 3. Ignoring emerging risks leads to collapse. The centerpiece of Sultan Mehmed's arsenal was a weapon of terrifying proportions. He had hired a Hungarian cannon founder named Orban, a master of his craft. Orban had first offered his services to the Byzantine emperor, but Constantine XI, his treasury depleted, could not afford Orban's high price. Mehmed, however, had no such constraints. He gave Orban unlimited resources and commanded him to build a cannon that could shatter the walls of Babylon itself. The result was the basilic, a monstrous bronze tube nearly 27 feet long. It took a team of 60 oxen and hundreds of men to move it. It could fire a stone ball over 1,200 pounds and reach a mile. Its purpose was not merely to harass or damage the ramparts. Its purpose was to pulverize the Theodosian walls. Alongside this Leviathan, Mehmed had assembled dozens of other large cannons. This was a technological disruption on a massive scale. The defenders were about to face a force that rendered their greatest strength obsolete. Their stone ramparts, which had stood for 1,000 years against catapults, were no match for the kinetic energy of gunpowder. The age of stone fortifications was coming to a violent end. In early April 1453, the Ottoman artillery was finally in place. The great cannons were aimed at the weakest section of the land walls, near the gate of St. Romanus. The defenders on the walls watched in grim silence. They could see the teams of men working to load the giant guns, ramming shot down their enormous barrels. The process was slow and laborious. The basilic could only be fired a few times a day, as the barrel had to be cooled with oil to prevent it from cracking. This slow pace gave the defenders a sliver of hope. Between bombardments, they worked frantically to repair the damage, piling rubble, piling earth, piling wooden barricades into the breaches. Then came the first shot. It was a sound the world had never truly heard before. Not the thud of a catapult, but a deafening, earth-shattering roar of thunder that echoed across the plains and shook the very foundations of the city. A huge cloud of white smoke billowed from the cannon's mouth. A moment later, the massive stone ball slammed into the outer wall with incredible force. A section of the ancient rampart simply disintegrated, stone and mortar exploding into dust and shrapnel. The defenders were stunned. They had known the cannons were coming, but they had not understood their power. Lesson 2. Adapt to technological disruption. The city's ancient defenses were being systematically dismantled by an invention they had failed to adopt and counter. For 53 days, the city endured a relentless storm of fire and stone. The Ottoman cannons boomed from dawn until dusk, a constant, nerve-wracking rhythm of destruction. The air was filled with the whistle of cannonballs, the crash of stone, the acrid smell of gunpowder. The main bombardment struck the central land walls, creating a landscape of ruin. Once proud towers reduced to jagged heaps of rubble. The outer wall breached in several places. The defenders, led by the emperor himself, and the brave Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, fought with desperate courage. A section of wall collapsed. They rushed to fill the gap, building makeshift barricades of earth, of wood, and of stone. The fighting spilled beyond the walls. Ottoman probing infantry assaults tested the defenders' resolve. Janissaries surged forward. Bashi bazooks pressed on. Ladders were raised. Grappling hooks flew, all under cover of cannon and archer fire. The defenders fought back with everything they had. They poured boiling oil. They unleashed Greek fire. Ladders were pushed back. Brutal hand-to-hand combat on narrow walkways. Nights were as terrifying as days. Fires glowed against the sky. Repair crews worked while the wounded groaned. Mehmed turned to the sea. The great chain sealed the Golden Horn, blocking the Ottoman fleet. Frustrated, the Sultan devised an audacious plan. He ordered a greased wooden road over the hill of Galata. In a single night, workers, under diversionary bombardment, dragged dozens of ships overland, from the Bosphorus into the Golden Horn. The next morning, defenders woke to an enemy fleet in their secure harbor. The city was now completely surrounded, supply lines cut. This feat of engineering crushed defender morale. They were exhausted, outnumbered, and completely trapped. Food and supplies ran low. Bombardment had shattered nerves and walls, yet they refused to surrender. Emperor Constantine V walked the walls daily, encouraging his men and sharing their risks, inspiring with unwavering courage. He embodied leadership, standing with his people in their darkest hour. His presence and commanders like Giustiniani held the defense together. Lesson 4. Morale and leadership matter. Even faced with overwhelming odds, strong leadership inspires extraordinary resilience. By the end of May, Mehmed knew the city was on the brink of collapse. He had offered a final chance for surrender, which Constantine XIII had stoically refused. The Sultan declared the final, all-out assault for May 29th. The night before, an ominous silence fell. The cannons ceased fire. The Ottoman camp lay quiet as soldiers rested and prepared. Inside the city, the mood was somber. A final service was held in the Hagia Sophia, the church filled with soldiers, nobles, merchants, common citizens, Orthodox, Catholic, Greek. Genoese prayed together. Before dawn, the attack began under cover of darkness. The Sultan hurled his forces in waves. First, irregular Bashi bazooks. Their purpose, exhaust defenders and absorb ammunition. They swarmed the breaches, yelling, only to be cut down. For 2 hours, defenders held. Next, regular Anatolian troops, better armed, more disciplined. They pressed on, climbing over the fallen. On the rubble-choked breaches, a brutal melee of swords, axes, spears. The defenders repelled this second wave but were exhausted and dwindling. At first light, the Sultan played his final card. He unleashed his elite janissaries. They advanced in disciplined columns, drums beating, fresh, armored, moving with terrifying purpose. They charged the main breach near the St. Romanus Gate, where the Emperor and Giustiniani held the line. The fighting intensified, a desperate clash in half-light. Then two fateful events nearly simultaneously. Giustiniani, towering leader, was grievously wounded. Cannonball fragment. Arquebus shot. His men carried him away. Panic and a momentary collapse followed. At the same time, Ottomans found the unlocked Kirkaporta. They scrambled through, raised the Sultan's banner, and opened the gate from within. The Ottoman flag inside the city shattered remaining morale. The line broke, the final defense failed, the enemy was inside. Once the Janissaries secured a foothold on top of the wall, the defense crumbled completely. The cry, "The city is taken!" spread like wildfire along the ramparts. The exhausted defenders, realizing the fight was lost, either fled or were overwhelmed. Ottoman soldiers poured through the breaches and the now open gates. They fanned out into the city, their banners held high. The 1,000-year reign of the Eastern Roman Empire was over in a matter of minutes. Emperor Constantine XV, seeing that all was lost, threw off his imperial regalia, charged into the fray with his last remaining soldiers. He died as he had lived, a Roman emperor fighting for his city. His body was never definitively identified. The initial hours after the fall were a scene of horror and chaos. For 3 days, the city was given over to plunder. Soldiers rampaged, breaking into homes, churches, monasteries. The treasures of a millennium were looted. Ancient manuscripts, priceless icons, sacred relics were destroyed or carried away. Thousands of citizens were killed. Tens of thousands more were rounded up to be sold into slavery. The great church of Hagia Sophia became a scene of terror as refugees huddled inside were captured. Sultan Mehmed II made his triumphal entry into the city on the afternoon of the first day. He rode his horse through the streets, marveling at the scale and beauty of his prize. He went directly to the Hagia Sophia. As he entered, he was awed by its grandeur. He ordered that the building be preserved and immediately converted into a mosque. An imam ascended the pulpit and recited the Islamic declaration of faith. The sound of the muezzin's call to prayer echoed through the great church for the first time. The symbol of Byzantine Christianity had become a symbol of Ottoman victory. The transformation of the city had begun. The fall of Constantinople was not just the end of a city, it was the end of an era. It marked the definitive end of the Roman Empire, a continuous political entity that had lasted for nearly 2,200 years since the founding of Rome. It sent shockwaves throughout Christian Europe. The event reshaped the map of the world, solidifying the Ottoman Empire as a major world power and shifting the balance of power from the Eastern Mediterranean to the rising nations of Western Europe. It was a turning point in history, a moment when the medieval world gave way to the early modern one. The fall of Constantinople offers more than just a dramatic story of a siege. It is a powerful case study in leadership, strategy, the forces of history. The city did not fall simply because the Ottoman army was larger. It fell because of a confluence of factors, long-term strategic failures. The Byzantines' reliance on past success, embodied by the Theodosian walls, blinded them to gunpowder. They failed to adapt to the technological disruption cannons represented. They clung to defenses no longer sufficient. Their legendary walls became a crutch, a symbol of a glorious past that could not protect them. For decades, the empire's leadership ignored emerging risks on its doorstep. The rise of the Ottomans was not a surprise. It was a slow, creeping threat for over a century. Internal divisions, political infighting, rigid adherence to tradition prevented a unified response. The city's institutions became brittle, unable to change. When the final crisis came, the empire lacked resources, unity, strategic flexibility to survive. Its collapse was the culmination of long decline. In the end, the defenders' courage was not enough. Constantine de Wande's leadership and his soldiers' resilience were inspiring, but morale alone cannot beat overwhelming force and superior technology. This story highlights the interplay between leadership, morale, technology, strategy. Mehmed II showed clear vision, meticulous planning, willingness to embrace disruptive technologies. The Ottomans were adaptable, unified, focused on a single objective, while their opponents were fragmented and bound by the past. The echoes of 1453 still resonate, a caution for leaders in business, politics, the military. Lessons: past glory isn't a guarantee. Ignoring disruptive change leads to irrelevance. Rigidity and unwillingness to adapt are fatal. The world is in flux. Survivors anticipate, adapt, respond. Constantinople did not fall overnight. It fell slowly, then all at once. Carved in stone, written in blood. Great institutions fall when they stop adapting.